Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus and see how this phone holds up in 2021. Now if you want to pick up this device, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now the Note 10 Plus came out a couple of years ago in 2019, so it's not quite 2 years old yet, but it's going to be fairly soon. And when this phone came out, this was the successor to the Note 9, and that in my opinion was one of my favorite phones ever made from an Android manufacturer, and I think Samsung did a really good job on that specific device. With the Note 10 Plus, it was a successor, and I think it was an overall better phone. I think the Note 10 was a weirder phone and not a better phone than the Note 9, but I think the Note 10 Plus holds that title for sure. Now the front of the Note 10 Plus has that 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display, and it's a 1440p panel, and it's a very good panel for sure. Fingerprint sensor in the display, very little bezel across the whole entire panel. This phone had ugly wallpapers, but other than that, the panel was great, curved display, and it looked really good. The only thing that it's missing nowadays is like a higher refresh rate, but I think other than that, this phone's panel still looks extremely good for sure. USB Type-C port on the bottom with the S Pen, which I'm sure most of you know by now. It's just a stylus. It adds a little bit more character to the phone. You can do a lot more with it. It's not a must-have, but it is a really cool thing that I'm really glad Samsung still puts into their devices. Now on the back, you do have that standard glass back, and you have wireless charging, reverse wireless charging, and as I mentioned, this is a beautiful looking phone, and the specific models that I bought was this like aura, like kind of rainbow colored kind of back to it. And again, as I mentioned, this phone had a lot going for it. This back was another cool little texture they added to it, and I think it was a pretty cool thing that they did, and I'm really glad they did it. And then it also has that camera setup that we'll get into in a second. This one had IP certification, micro SD card slot, all that good stuff, and I think for sure this is a solid phone. This is one of my favorite phones of 2019. Of course, it wasn't perfect. It was not like my top 5 phones of that year, but I think it was a pretty good phone overall, and I'm actually really happy Samsung did this one. I'm just not happy about the Note 10. The Note 10 Plus, it was a totally different beast than the standard Note 10 in my opinion. So in terms of the outside, that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting on the cameras, this thing on the back has that quadruple camera setup. So it has that 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor, then a 0.3 megapixel depth sensor. And this camera lens overall is a very solid lens for sure. It's still a very good camera, even though since then we've gotten 8K capability and all these other things. This is by far still a really good camera, and I think a majority of you will probably end up knowing that. This camera, obviously 4K at 60, 1080p up to 240, which I don't know why anybody won't do that, but you have that capability of zooming in a lot, zooming out a lot, and having that wide angle lens. As I always mention, this is like the most important thing I always say. You need to have those type of camera setups in this day and age. If you don't, you are already outdated. If you don't have an ultra wide and telephoto, luckily for you with this specific lens, you have that capability by default. So that is a very important thing to keep in mind, and I really do think that is one of the most important things that this phone has going for it is the camera. You also have a 10 megapixel front facing camera, 4K at 60, and again, you have a very good camera on the front and the back. On top of this One UI, you obviously know how I feel about One UI, not my favorite cup of tea, but it does have a lot of features within the camera app, and that is one thing I cannot take away from this device. You have a very good piece of software when it comes down to the camera. Everything else, I'm not the biggest fan of, but you have a lot of features when it comes down to this camera. So when it comes down to that, I will definitely say the camera is one of my favorite things about the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus in 2021 for sure, 100% fact. Now moving on to two different areas, the software and the battery life. First of all, the software actually has gotten, I guess, better, if you would call that, since the first day it came out. So it is getting an extra year of software support per last year's announcement, but it is also getting an extra year of security updates. So that is another pretty big advantage that this one has going for it. So as I've mentioned before, and I'll continue to say it, I'm not a fan of One UI, but I'm really happy that Samsung is improving and kind of, increasing their lifespan of their devices. Having that type of capability is something that's really awesome, and I love having a phone that'll just last forever. So when it comes down to the software, you can't custom ROM it. It's not that stock. You do have a lot of features built in. The camera UI is very good too, so keep that in mind as well. But as I mentioned before, I think I would rather have stock Android than this phone, but I really do like how this phone's software is the way it is, and I like the features built in too. So in terms of the software lifecycle, that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting on the battery life, this phone has a massive 4300 mAh battery inside of it. And this phone, I mean, it's a crazy big size battery for sure. Of course, we've gotten bigger since then. I think the S21 Ultra has a massive size battery in it, but that's still a really good size battery for this thing. You have wireless charging, reverse wireless charging like I mentioned before. So this phone is going to last for quite a bit of time in terms of a battery standpoint. So I think the battery is one of my favorite things about this phone. The software, not so much, but again, it gets the job done for the most part. So in terms of that covers it up in that standpoint. Now hitting on the performance and ending it off with the performance, really, this thing had the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and Adreno 640 GPU, and 2 different models, but both models had 12 gigs of RAM. So I can tell you, you don't even need me to say this phone's performance is very solid for sure. It's a very good performing device. This is one of those phones that you can pick up even like a year from now, and it's still going to be an extremely fast phone. This phone has, more RAM than some MacBooks that I've bought, recently. Most MacBooks start off at 8 gigs of RAM. This thing has 12 gigs of RAM inside. Now, of course, phones and, laptops do a little bit different with their RAM, but this is still, it's still 12 gigs of RAM. And you have to keep this in mind. This phone's performance is still extremely top tier. It is not an outdated phone just because it's a couple years old. It's not even 2 years old, to be honest. Now, if you're doing light things, just Snapchats and, Instagram videos and editing kind of like small little stuff, then you'll be fine. Light video games and mobile games, it's going to be fine too. Even if you take it up a notch, you do like a super heavy games on your device. If you somehow play Fortnite on your phone, if you're able to get that, which there's like 30 different ways to do it. If you're able to, video edit on your specific note, you're going to have a very good experience. This phone is essentially made for these things. It could get a little hot. That's the only thing that I've seen with my Note 10s. They do get a little bit hot, kind of similar, not extremely similar to my Galaxy S8 or S8 Plus, but it's kind of in that same ballpark. So kind of keep that in mind. If you're planning on doing a bunch of heavy things, then you may have a different experience on it. But I do think for the most part, you're going to be fine. And I really do think that the performance of this phone is definitely one of its biggest assets for sure, especially now in 2021. So in terms of that covers it up there. And to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus in 2021? Well, this is pretty much what I'll tell you. I think the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus is still extremely worth it in this day and age. I think it's a very solid phone and has a ton going for it. Like I mentioned, it's not perfect. There are some areas that I'm not a super huge fan of, but I think it gets the job done and I'm really happy about this specific phone. This phone has a beautiful screen with the S Pen capability, which is still one of my favorite things about this device. USB Type-C with Samsung DeX, which is awesome. microSD card slot, IP certification, which is huge. Wireless charging with a reverse wireless charging on the back, a very good quadruple camera setup on the back as well. That is definitely one of its biggest assets, and a pretty decent front-facing camera as well. The phone looks futuristic. I love the specific version that I bought with the color on the back, and I also love pretty much everything else about this phone too. The battery life is amazing on this device, and that is really, this phone is just a killer phone in so many different ways. I'm not a huge fan of, maybe like the software, that's really the only problem I have with this phone, to be honest. Other than that, I think this phone is a very solid phone for sure, and I would highly recommend all of you, if you have the, money, if you want to buy this phone, you can pick it up for fairly cheap in some markets. So I would highly recommend picking it up if you want to. Again, I'll leave a link down below. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time, but that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.